In this Component 1 screencast, we're going to take a look at another core sociological theory called Interactionism. And as we shall see in a moment, Interactionism is quite a different theory to the other perspectives that we've been looking at so far. The three theories that we've looked at so far are all what we call structural perspectives. In other words, they take a top-down view of this relationship between society and the individual and really focus on explaining the overall structure of society and how that shapes and influences individual behaviour. Interactionism, on the other hand, is an example of what we call an agency theory, sometimes called a social action theory. And social action theories argue that people are not merely the product of structures in society, but are in fact also the active creators of society who have choices in how they act. So agency theories take a bottom-up view of this relationship between the individual and society. So as we can see in this cartoon, interactionism is a perspective that looks at the ways in which individuals create society through their everyday interactions. And therefore, from this perspective, behaviour is not seen simply as a response to external social forces. Instead, people are viewed as conscious individuals who can choose how to act and thus may react differently to the same social stimulation if the circumstances are different. And therefore, from this perspective, we are mistaken if we see individuals as simply the puppets of society. And because interactionism is interested in small-scale interaction, it's an example of what we call a micro perspective. The other theories that we've looked at so far are more general approaches, macro perspectives that stand back and look at how society works as a whole, whereas micro perspectives try to explore behaviour in much more detail in individual social contexts. Okay, before I look at the main principles of interactionism, just press the pause button and have a think about what this image depicts. So is it a rather badly drawn duck, or is it a crudely drawn rabbit, or perhaps you think it looks like neither? Okay, the meaning that you attach to this image obviously depends on your interpretation. And as far as interactionism is concerned, understanding the way in which people interpret the world, the meanings that they attach to social situations, to other people, is the most important starting point for sociology. From this perspective, the way in which we act is determined by the meanings that we give to social situations and the various symbols that represent those situations. So from this perspective, in order to understand human behaviour, you have to empathise with people, you have to see the world from their point of view, and this is a practice that Max Weber called Verstehen. So individuals construct meaning by looking at a social situation, analysing key symbols such as language, gestures, appearance, the manners of others, and also trying to understand the social context in which that particular interaction takes place. So from the perspective of interactionism, human behaviour, unlike instinctive animal behaviour, is always based on interpretation of the meanings of other people's actions and the social situations in which we find ourselves. And we actively create culture through this social interaction. And our interpretations, of course, are based on our experiences. And by interacting with other people, we learn to take the role of the other and see ourselves as others see us. A second key principle of interactionist approaches is their rejection of the idea that society somehow has an existence of its own, an objective reality beyond the individuals that make up that society. From this perspective, society doesn't have an objective existence of its own, it only exists in our heads. society is simply what we imagine it to be. So it's subjectively experienced by people. And from this perspective, social life is possible because individuals share enough common and shared meanings that usually enable those individuals to successfully interact with one another. So from this perspective, society isn't a thing with a life of its own. It's an elaborate fiction, like a story which arises from the imagination and thoughts of social actors. A third key principle of interactionist approaches is the idea that to make sense of our lives, we have to categorise people and situations. And this is important to us as individuals because social life is potentially very unpredictable and very chaotic, and the process of putting people and situations into categories gives the impression of order and stability. And when we interact with other people, we do so in terms of these categories, which are stored in our head. So somebody talks about their home, their friend, their doctor, etc. We know what they're talking about because in our heads we have similar categories, and this enables us to interact with others on the basis of these shared meanings. And a final key principle of interactionism is this idea that society or social order is in fact very fragile. And this is because interactionists believe that society is built from the bottom up through everyday interaction between individuals within it. And therefore they believe that social reality has a fluid and dynamic nature, and that many of the things that we take as fact are in fact social construction, simply a product of the meanings which have been attached to people and events within a particular culture. So the only reason why there seems to be a stable and consistent social world is because individuals negotiate shared meaning and thus create these consistencies. So to summarise, interactionists argue that interpretation is the key to understanding human action. It's how we see things, how we define other people and social situations that is important. Now, a really important contribution of interactionism to sociology is it's a theory that is very useful if we want to understand how identities are constructed through a process of social interaction. So from this perspective, we create a self-identity through social interaction and through the social relationships that we form with other people. In other words, I know who I am by understanding how other people see me. So it's this capacity to take on board the role of other people that's essential in understanding the development of the self. And Charles Cooley coined the term the looking glass self to describe this process of how the images of ourselves are reflected in the reactions of other people. So who am I? Well, the interactionist answer to that question would be I am what I think you think I am. And interactionist ideas about the construction of self-identity have been developed into a really influential approach known as labelling theory. And as I mentioned earlier, in order to make sense of the social world, we put people and events into social categories. In other words, we attach labels to people and to social situations. And often these labels are based on assumptions and stereotypes and can be sticky and difficult to shake off. And interactionists note that once attached to an individual, these labels almost have a life of their own and have the potential to have both positive effects but also damaging outcomes. However, since we soon come to learn that other people interpret our behaviour, we're often trying to manipulate these interpretations to suit our own vision of ourselves. In other words, we use our capacity to be self-reflexive, to take on board the role of other people in order to present the person that we wish others to think that we are. And this is a process that the sociologist Erving Goffman called impression management. And Goffman was a sociologist who used analogies with drama for analysing social interactions. So Goffman argued that individuals are social actors who act out scripts, using props, resting backstage between performances that we present to our audience. And the aim of social interaction, Goffman argued, is to carry off a convincing performance of the particular role that we've adopted, just as the actor aims to persuade the audience that he really is a particular character. Now, the labels given to individuals can become particularly significant where they're attached to an individual by somebody in a position of power and influence, such as a teacher. And according to labelling theory, one particular problem is that labels can become what Howard Becker calls master statuses. In other words, they become the single characteristic which comes to define a particular person. And as a result of acquiring a master status, the opportunities available to the labelled person are limited, and therefore pushing them in particular directions in life and barring alternatives. And therefore, one possible outcome of labelling is the production of what sociologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is where the social pressures resulting from the label, coupled with its internalisation, can lead to it actually coming true, regardless of its original accuracy. So sociologists have shown that students who are labelled in a negative way, who are labelled as being of low ability or of being a troublemaker, are much more likely to live up to those teacher expectations. Once again, can you make sure that now that you've watched this video, you also go on to iLearn and work through the online lesson on interactionism? Sociological theories are such an important part of the course, and the extra time that you put into really trying to learn these theories as well as you can will really help you later on in the course.